and enjoy this discussion because this is the crux of the matter. We have talked about what a brand is. We've talked about different types of brands, the personal, the corporate, and how to brand the nation. Now is how do you do it? What are the vehicles that are available to you? You need to be attentive. Please join me as we welcome Mr. Joe Taylor.
You know, there's an age-old conundrum, a question that every public speaker has faced for 2 millennia, easily. And I want you to know, though, I have done the research, careful, meticulous, scientific research, okay? And I know the answer to the question. The question is, how long does the last speaker of the day speak? And the answer is, not very. So that's my promise to you. If brands make a promise, that's my promise to you. You know, many years ago, I worked in Washington, D.C. As a press secretary for a U.S. congressman. And one of the things I did for him was I wrote speeches for him. And without fail, he'd get to the House floor, take out this speech I'd spent so much time on, put it down, he'd read the first paragraph, and then he would ad-lib the rest, right? Missing the great structure and all the major points, he just rambled around, really irritated me. So I'm not going to make that mistake. I wrote my speech. I'm going to read it, word for word. And I also agree, actually, for me the debate's been settled. No slides. A couple of points of interest about my talk. First of all, we keep talking about the vehicles. I just want you to know that my conception of the vehicle term, right, pretty loose, pretty broad, or esoteric maybe, a little unorthodox. And you'll see what I mean in a little bit. Also, you might find my talk a little bit wonky. Do we know that term here in Tanzania? Wonky? No? Yeah. Yes, we do.
Is it a proxy for something else?
And so the good part is it's going to be short, so you can put up with wonkiness for a few minutes. The Public Relations Society of America says convergence of advertising and public relations is one of the major trends to watch for in 2012. What they're highlighting is a trend that has been going on for a few years now. It's the combining of advertising and public relations functions, and they're doing it already at some of the world's largest consumer product companies. Companies like General Electric, IBM, Procter & Gamble, Nissan, Xerox. And there are a number of factors driving this convergence. The growing pervasiveness of social media is probably the primary catalyst. That's a whole topic unto itself, and I'm not going to spend much time on it. There's another factor that I find interesting, and I find it interesting because of what I do for a living, which is help businesses understand the impact of media on their business, with advertising and public relations. So, this factor has to do with an aspect of brand communication that has received very little attention. And I'm talking about the intersection or the interrelationship between advertising and news coverage. At Push Observer, we work every day with both advertising and public relations professionals, but it's rare to see those two disciplines working together within the same organization. Convergence is not the rule in most organizations. The two disciplines, they tend to operate in their own separate silos. The advertising people, they work to communicate key messages through paid media. And the public relations folks, they work to communicate messages through free media or earned media. And that's most commonly through the news media. So because the two groups, again, traditionally, there are some exceptions, because these two groups have not worked closely together, little attention has been given to how news and advertising actually interact to influence brand perceptions. The use of outside agencies, by the way, compounds the problem. Sorry, Rashid. The status quo is dominated by the advertising side, because they typically get the largest share of the marketing budget, and they have little incentive to look for alternatives to advertising. Again, I'm speaking generally, broadly. And it may be that the public relations people inadvertently are contributing to maintaining this status quo. And here's what I mean by that. For decades, the PR folks paid little attention to rigorous metrics and evaluation. I think everybody can agree with that. However, now, in recent years, management has been calling for more accountability, and this has sparked a greater interest by the public relations side in finding tools for measuring the effectiveness of media relations. Most companies are still developing these tools, and so they have not yet gotten to the question of how news might interact with advertising. I told you it was wonky, right? Kind of an obscure topic. Well, here's the point. In brand building, it's the message that matters. Both the message you control through advertising and marketing, and the message you try to influence anyway through news coverage. The message is the vehicle. The message is the vehicle. There are 100 different versions of the vehicle, but it's the message that matters. Marshall McLuhan, he's not in my speech here, but Marshall McLuhan famously said, the medium is the message. For advertising and public relations and brand building, the message is the message, okay? And we use the message as a vehicle to get to our audiences. Now, consumer researchers tell us that consumers don't differentiate between sources of brand messages. We absorb all the messages, we let them rattle around in our brain for a little while, and then we conjure up a brand image from all the pieces that we've been exposed to. And this is an important insight. Adverts do not live in their own world. They operate in a much wider environment that includes news coverage and other public discussion of your brands. You can have a killer creative that ranks high in effectiveness when it's running in a neutral environment, but in a negative environment, that same ad will be far less compelling because consumers have trouble synchronizing the ad message with all the other messages rattling around in their head, including those coming from the news media. Now, there has been some important research in this area, and that's what I want to talk to you about today, because it will, I hope, shed some light on the topic and get us to start thinking in this direction. Because convergence, I believe the PRSA is absolutely on target. Convergence matters, and more companies understand how valuable it is. A few years ago, AT&T, the giant American telecom company, everybody knows AT&T? AT&T devoted significant resources to studying the correlation between advertising and sales results. What they found was that advertising sometimes correlates with sales, but not always. And this inconsistency they found baffling. So they dug deeper, and their research produced a breakthrough. It showed that negative publicity literally, actually, cancels out the benefits of paid advertising. Negative publicity, including negative news articles, blogs, social media, actually removes the benefits of concurrent advertising. This was AT&T research. The research also found that overall, advertising and news coverage each has its own impact on consumers, and these impacts interact to influence brand perceptions. Got advertising, it's having its influence, maybe. PR over here, news coverage, positive, negative, neutral, having its influence. But the point here is, these come together and have a separate influence. So, in times of normal news coverage, that's mostly positive news, a little bit of negative maybe, but mostly positive. News and advertising work together. I think you all already know this. And incremental advertising has a positive impact on advertisers. In times of widespread and extremely negative news coverage, though, incremental advertising does not have a positive incremental impact, and may even have a negative impact. In other words, news coverage can have a substantial impact on consumers equal to or beyond advertising. Another study out of Holland shows that moderately educated customers, I'll leave it up to you to understand just what they mean by that. Moderately, I think we're all at least moderately educated. Moderately educated customers are more susceptible to the news. This means that in the wake of negative news, advertising may still be worthwhile when the target groups are largely located either among the higher educated, who are apt to discount the negative news, or among the lower educated who are not very aware of it. The problem is, the developer, we're all kind of right there in the middle, right? A moderately educated news consumer. Now, by the way, websites with, and you've seen this before, BP, when they lost their oil cap in the Gulf of Mexico, and was spewing for months and months. They tried a lot of different things, but you could go to their website and they had all of this information. And what we found is that websites with elaborate information to counterbalance the negative reports in the press may actually miss the target because only highly aware consumers will have the patience to read the skills, and the skills to comprehend this information. Mass media campaigns with one simple countervailing message may also miss their target because many unaware consumers will be reached who were not even aware of the negative reports in the press in the first place. Whereas, in the meanwhile, the highly aware citizens will reject the oversimplistic messages. You're getting the point here that this is not kindergarten stuff. There's a lot going on here. It's this interaction that we're trying to talk about. One more piece of research to throw into the mix. This is from the psychologists. Negative publicity can impact the way consumers feel about a brand, of course, and influence their spending habits. However, not everyone responds to negative publicity in the same way. A study published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology shows that consumers react differently to negative publicity depending on what type of thinking pattern they exhibit. And there are basically two types. There are analytic thinkers and holistic thinkers, right? An easy way to understand about the thinking sides is to look, and the folks who know me are going to get a chuckle out of this, I think. Take a look at how people react to bad service in a restaurant. The analytic thinker would immediately label the restaurant bad service. A holistic consider the factors affecting the service. Was the server's section extremely busy? Was the kitchen backed up? Were they short-staffed? Was the waiter just having a bad day? People's reactions to negative publicity about a brand are heavily influenced by where they place blame. So when people stop to consider the circumstances, they're more likely to place blame on outside sources as opposed to internal sources. Holistic thinkers, holistic thinkers are more open to considering all the circumstances, and they're less affected by negative publicity because they consider all the factors in play. Analytic thinkers tend to ignore the contextual factors, the nuance, and they assign blame right to the individual or the company or whoever is the focus of the media. Now, some companies try to compensate for negative publicity by raising their advertising budget, and whereas other companies decide to keep silent. A couple of examples. Royal Dutch Shell. By the way, in MBA school, when we do the case studies, Royal Dutch Shell does not come out too well. Every time I see this name of this brand, I remember those case studies in school. Anyway, Royal Dutch Shell was heavily criticized in the news several years back now for its intention to sink an oil derrick in the North Sea to the sea bottom. Anybody remember that back in the 90s? They tried to restore their environmental image by explaining the decision in their ads about why they had to sink this oil derrick in the North Sea. Now, KLM. KLM, separate again. I'm using these two to draw the distinction about the two responses. KLM was overwhelmed by media criticism after 440 squirrels were put down after having been illegally transported in a KLM cargo. I don't know, does Tanzania have squirrels? I've never seen one. You have squirrels? Okay, so you know what? You know the cute little... KLM, what did they do? They immediately stopped all their advertising. Now, the research suggests that the Shell policy was a waste of money and the KLM decision was appropriate. Advertisers should wait until a storm of negative news dies down. So what are the implications of this quick, digested view of the research that I presented? What are the implications for brand managers? Well, first, it means management of both media relations and advertising will benefit from closer communication and convergence. This would make it possible to turn up or turn down the advertising spend in relation to the current news environment. And that could save companies money, of course, and help deliver a more effective communication. Because it's all about the message, right? Second, it means companies should use many different methods to try to prevent a media story. Why react when you can prevent it? But how do you prevent a media story? Well, there are a lot of different vehicles. Get through the word vehicles in again. There are a lot of different ways to do this. Some companies monitor their own company telephone communications and the complaint systems. They watch public websites, discussion groups, blogs, podcasts, social media posts. And you're doing this to understand what's the word on the street, what's the word of mouth, what are my customers talking about. And by anticipating negative media, they can join in that discussion and provide new words, new propositions, new topics. In other words, they can help those holistic thinkers understand there's another reason for this. They can even do what we call a stealing thunder operation to admit the shortcomings and failures right up front. Get it out of the way. This is what politicians are told to do, but they don't always do. The third implication, with regards to those thinking styles, consider the impact on your crisis communications strategy. And we all have a crisis communication strategy in place, right? Okay. Actually, there's another piece of research that says no, very few do. Tactics that are designed to influence consumers' thinking styles could give you a strategic advantage right in the middle of your crisis. If consumers are encouraged to pay attention to the contextual factors like industry problems or third-party suppliers, they'll be less likely to assign blame to your brand, and also less likely to form attitudes based off of the negative publicity that may be swirling around. And lastly, because messages from both media worlds combine in the minds of the consumers, consistent messaging is essential for effective brand building. Consistent messaging is essential. And what we mean by that is between your advertising and your PR. And this brings us back to convergence of the advertising and public relations functions. Expanding your brand through advertising and protecting your reputation through public relations are two sides of the same coin. Recognizing this means the advertising group and the public relations group have to start talking. The message from both silos has to be the same, has to be consistent. In a world where everyone is a publisher, it's critical that companies work to understand the interrelationships of all communications channels, including the advertising and the news channels. I think it's fair to say companies that fail to listen to all channels and respond effectively will be punished in the marketplace. Companies that define themselves with consistent communication will be rewarded. Thank you very much. Did I deliver on my promise for short?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Now questions and comments. Like I said, this is a very important aspect of this seminar. So please, all your comments, all your questions.
There seems to be a recent trend of when there's a company that has a crisis to put the CEO right up front, which they never did before. And when companies don't do that, they get beaten down. Is that going to be continued as a trend, or in terms of this being a brand conference, how would that? What people are going to learn from that, or what can they take away from that particular exercise?
Tony, this goes back to the crisis PR plan that everybody's supposed to have in place in practice. And the modern conception of this, of course, is the guy at the top, the CEO, the face of the company, a human face of the company, has to come out and admit the mistake or explain what they're going to do differently to fix it, etc. So, it's because this, I think you're right, it's become the common response, right? Nowadays, when you don't see it, you notice it. Or when the CEO apparently didn't go through the crisis communications training and comes out and says things like the BP president did about, "You're ruining my vacation." that doesn't work out. But I think you're right. That's the way to do it, because you have to put a human face on it, and you have to contextualize it.
I've got a comment as well to that. We often also deal with companies and corporations in crisis. And I don't know how developed the media are here in Tanzania, but certainly in the UK and Western Europe, we tend to see journalists today coming with an agenda when there is a crisis. They've already almost written the story. They just want someone from the company to go up and say, "We're sorry," and then they come with a hidden agenda that we didn't see coming, or if it's a television interview, they edit it so they always show the bad things they're saying. So the last year or so, we've actually started to recommend clients not to participate in interviews, not for the CEO to stand forward, because the story is already written. The journalist has already made up his mind. So we would rather have the CEO spend time with the stakeholders directly, reach out through social media and other vehicles. So it's a new trend, and a lot of our clients are very nervous about it, because it has been the trend that, of course, no matter what, you go up and say, I'm sorry, we're never going to do it again, it's not going to happen again, and this is why it's not going to happen again.
I see that point. I think there's a distinction, though, and that is, I would never recommend that a CEO hold a press conference or talk directly to a journalist in that kind of situation. I agree with you. Controlling the message, doing it through your own media, through your blogs and sites. Yeah, that makes sense. But I think he has to release the statement to the media. He should do that. Unless he's really got a strong position, right? He can control the message. But yeah, I think you make a good point.
Joe, I've been reading a novel by Grisham, familiar with Grisham, the latest novel, The Litigators. Now the book, the novel, is just about your country's numerous cases against everything and sundry. Okay, but I was wondering the role of lobbyists, because the lobbyists also lie at the heart of this particular novel. Here is a pharmaceutical company that is just about to be sued for what is deemed to be a drug that sort of causes heart seizures and cardiac arrest and whatnot. And the class actions, are pretty frightful in terms of billions of dollars that might come out. So these companies, they employ lobbyists in Washington, D.C., basically to, deal with the FDA or the Capitol Hill. How do you see the role of lobbyists as a vehicle in corporate branding? And maybe even by extension, the role of lobbyists in nation branding. Because I also know that Uganda, a few years ago, President Museveni was facing a lot of difficulties with respect to apparently disappearance of money that had been given by philanthropies and whatnot for the HIV/AIDS problem. And I know that also some other countries who appointed lobbyists in Washington, D.C. to deal with the slave labor issues. I know Tanzania itself got into a situation where I think one of the diplomats in Washington, D.C. had employed a Tanzanian girl or young lady, who then disappeared because she was not being properly paid, and she landed in the hands of some, affirmative action groups and whatnot. And Tanzania really became very, very much concerned about this. Its image, was sort of being damaged. So countries also do go out and appoint lobbyists, basically to do what they call it. Is it brand damage
Reputation,
that sort of yeah. So I was thinking, talking about vehicles and branding. Where do you really place the role of lobbyists?
I find that fascinating, a fascinating thought. I never would have put lobbyists in the role of a message vehicle, but they are, absolutely. Like I said, I spent some time in Washington, D.C., and the place is overrun with lobbyists. And the most charitable description of a lobbyist is a man or a woman who educates legislators, right? Brings them some information that maybe they didn't know. Of course, lobbyists have agendas, and clearly they're not neutral in whatever topic they're speaking with legislators about, or committees, trying to effect change. Usually, always to benefit their customer, the guy who's paying the bill. I think the way to look at that, or think about it, is if you go back and again, I said it was kind of an esoteric view of the vehicle, but the message is the vehicle. That there are so many different ways to deliver the message, right? So using lobbyists, it's a great idea. I never thought about it. I need a lobbyist. I've got a boss. Sometimes I wish I had a lobbyist explaining why it's not my fault. That's a great insight.
I have a question. Yeah. Oh. All the examples you gave were really basically situations where there was crisis, as in you give most of the examples you gave. But I would assume that the convergence you're talking about between PR and advertising would be there if there is no crisis. Normally they'll be saying the same thing, right? So could you just throw some light on what it should be when there's no crisis? Because most of the organizations here don't have crisis really, so.
Okay. She says there are no crises in no corporate well, the whole idea of convergence is that you're simply making sure that the disciplines understand that they affect each other, right? And once you understand that they have an impact on each other, the natural result is you want to coordinate. Since they're going to have an effect anyway, you want to coordinate. So in times of, even if you're not running a public relations campaign, right? You're Vodacom, you're buying your ads day in and day out, and everything's cool over here, and happens to be a month where you don't have a campaign, a PR campaign. Still, everything that the guys and women in the public relations department do is about the message, right? And making sure that there's consistency in what you're advertising, what you're promising. Again, it's about what the brand is promising to deliver. To me, it seems obvious that those two disciplines should not be in silos. They should be integrated. There are structural reasons why they're not. Things I referred to earlier, another reason is just traditionally, advertising is easier to measure because the sales either went up or they didn't, right? PR is very squishy, and there's a whole topic there too, by the way. Maybe on one of the future seminars we can talk about what are the appropriate metrics for measuring public relations impact. And I shouldn't say appropriate because there's so many different approaches to it, and each instance maybe requires its own appropriate metric. But, like I said, that's a whole other subject. So yeah, the convergence should be going on all the time, whether it's negative publicity or not, because you're trying to all be on the same page about what the message is. Right? And nowadays, with the social media buzz, I almost call it a fad, but that would show that I'm really old. So let's see. I think social media is, since it's just another channel for communication, right? And you know, the channels are piling up. We've got a lot now. In the old days, it was newspapers or books, and then the telegraph came along, and then the telephone, and radio, and film, and television. And the other ones don't go away, do they? I mean, you always hear about the prediction of the death of newspapers or the death of whatever. No, they're all still there, and social media is just one more. It's the one front and center right now. So in that way, I think it's a fad, meaning that all the attention will eventually die down and we'll just accept social media as another channel. And it's unique because it's our customers communicating with us and with each other, but we get to join in on that conversation. It's not a one-way deal. That's the great thing about social media. So, don't know if I answered your question, but I spent a few minutes trying.
Okay. One last question before we.
Mr. Taylor, I think a big percentage of your presentation, if not all of it, is touching on the vehicles of branding, tackling crisis externally. My interest would be on the do's and don'ts on the tackling crisis internally within the organization.
Internal crisis.
Internal crisis. You have corporations whereby, if I can try and quote Mr. Bobachu in his presentation, that they certain leaderships by intimidation. Now, how do you solve an internal crisis when you have a leader who is leading by intimidation? And this is someone who definitely like his mother say yes. Sorry, just stand up and say I'm sorry. But is giving a huge negative brand publication, PR, in social media about the ministry itself. What would be the tactical means of, approaching this with that solving?
So the boss is a tyrant, is that what you're saying? And he leads by intimidation, though that's not leadership, obviously. And you're saying there's an internal crisis, and how do you handle that? So you can't replace the MD, right? He still needs to be there. I don't know. Maybe an analyst, psycho analyst, I don't know.
No.
Goes without saying. It's a theoretical situation. Well, I mean, I'm an MD, and so I think about things like this. Dealing with, I don't think I'm a tyrant of this, so ask my folks, I guess. HR is really critical for helping manage that. But that opens up the whole can of worms about HR, who are they reporting to, who do they represent, and maybe the second thought maybe should be. I don't know. It's a great question. If you have an internal communications department, I would think they would have figured out by now how to deal with the leadership and kind of massage the situation. I don't think I can offer much information on that. Good insight.
Joe, I just wanted to add one more thing about the advertising and the PR convergence when there isn't the crisis. What I've been in PR for about 6-7 weeks now. What I've noticed is that in terms of public relations, this is not across the board, that there tends to be an on and off switch. There's a campaign, and then the PR drops off. And there's a campaign, and the PR drops off. And when there's a convergence of PR and advertising, it doesn't drop off. The PR person's job is to monitor the message because you don't have control over what other people are saying and writing. And that, in effect, is going to affect what the advertising department is doing. So even though there isn't an event, there isn't a sponsorship, there isn't something going on that you have to actively push, your responsibility is the brand. And that doesn't mean that you have a tennis tournament or you're sponsoring a Miss Tanzania or whatever it is. That means you're responsible for the brand, what is said about the brand by other people, what one of your executives have said when he or she has opened their mouth at a bar. And so there's no off switch. And that's where the convergence comes in, because you have to, when you find these things that are going on that you have no control of, you have to talk to the ad people and say, we've got to pull these because they're really pissing people off. because you're also monitoring the response to the ads. That's your job too. So it's, the convergence is, there's no on and off switch. You're always on. And that's one of the things I believe has to begin happening here.
Yeah, and to highlight the staying in touch with all the discussion, not just in the media, but all the public discussion. Somebody has to own that, stay on top of it, and then communicate with the advertising side so that they can reach the right balance that they need.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Joe Taylor.